I can say personally, I am just so excited to introduce you to Brooke Brown, our Washington's 2021 Teacher of the Year. She has just blown me away in terms of her reflections and caring and empathy with students. And she has spent the past 15 years teaching English language arts and ethnic studies at Washington High School in the Franklin Pierce School District. Her work, she creates an inclusive classroom where students can show up authentically, cultivate their understanding of their own identity, and develop empathy and compassion for others. We are so pleased to welcome Brooke. I know you are all in for a treat as you get to hear her share further. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much for having me. Can everyone see the first slide? All right. So welcome, good morning. So we're here to talk about diversifying the educator workforce and really thinking about what that means for our young people and what that means for our future. And so I just want to start off by just saying thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the care that you bring every day to center what our students need. And for supporting all of you, all of the educators doing this really important work. So this has been a year. This has been a tough year, and y'all can still continue to show up every day. So I just wanted to start off and just say thank you so much, heartfelt gratitude towards you. So I just want to start off with this quote and thinking about who I bring in the room. I have this title of Teacher of the Year, but it's just a title. It's just a reflection of the community that I have the beautiful opportunity to be a part of. My mentors, folks that I respect, that I get to learn and grow with every day. We're all educators of the year. So I just want to just start off with this. Sonia Renee Taylor, she wrote the book, The Body Is Not an Apology. It's a book on radical self-love. I highly encourage everyone to read it if you haven't yet. One thing you'll learn about me very quickly is every time you talk to me, you'll probably get a book recommendation because I absolutely love to read. But here we go. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. So thinking about how can we utilize the experience that we've had over the past year to really think about how we can stitch that new garment. How can we really think about how can we collectively work together to each play our specific part in stitching that new garment that fits all of humanity and nature. So a little bit about me. I was born in Seattle. I identify as a biracial Black woman. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I absolutely love to read. I just said that. And I love ice cream and pizza, but it doesn't love me. I'm dairy free. So a little bit about me. All right. Another thing that I think about when whenever I'm doing the work or in spaces, connecting with folks is who I was as a young person. So this is a picture of me in preschool on Heritage Day. And as you can see, some students in my class had access to their culture, had connections to their backgrounds, and some didn't. So much of my history as a young person and as an adult now has been about absence. My father was not involved in my life. I actually have never met him, and he passed away a few years ago. And so my mom identifies as white. And so a big part of my culture, my identity, I didn't have access to. So my mom went to the fabric store, did the best that she could. But I grew up with my brother and sister who are older, but grew up with my dad. So my connection to my culture comes through my siblings. And so really thinking about so much of the work that we have to do in our classrooms to help our students connect to their identity, connect to their past, we have to first do. We have to go on the journey for ourselves to really historicize where we got to today for our own individual selves. We are all connected to a specific place. And so because we live in a racialized society, some of us have had the opportunity to learn about our past and some haven't. And so it's really important that we take and support our young people to go on that journey to really reclaim their culture. And so for some of our students, just like in this picture, it's a celebration of their culture and their heritage. And for some of our students, it's a process of reclamation. It's a process of finding out and sort of going on a journey. And so really modeling that for our young people by doing that for ourselves. I also bring my family. So I have 4 children. I have a 18-year-old who's graduating from high school next, or in a few weeks, actually, like week after next. I have an 8th grader. I have a rising high schooler. I have a 3rd grader and a 10-month-old. So remote learning has been real at our house this past year. And I also bring my students. So this is a picture of my first cohort of ethnic studies. And these young people are the reason why I do my job every day. I became a teacher because I wanted to be that person that I needed when I was a young person. And this was a day we were working on our family history project. We're doing critical family history. And my mentor, Erin Jones, who's been a mentor of mine since I was a middle schooler, was in class that day teaching with my students. And as you can see, they were pumped to hear her story and to be in her presence. So just such a great example of how community is really built. Here's another picture of us. This is us at the Northwest Teaching for Social Justice Conference. And something that's really important in my classroom is that whatever is discussed in class stays in class, right? We learn about confidentiality and building trust, but whatever is learned here has to leave here. So really thinking about what connections, what action can we take as a community? How can we impact the space around us positively, and really thinking about that. And so I get the question a lot this year, like, why did you become a teacher? And I always say it's because I couldn't be a pink Power Ranger. I learned quickly that that's not a viable like job application or thing I can put on my resume. But I do want to impact just the space around me for positive. I want to help my students really learn how they can shift the material conditions around them. So when I became a teacher, I really wanted to think about equality and equity. Like that was what I really was interested in. I wanted to make sure that I was helping students really become the best versions of themselves, helping them to become who they wanted to be. And I realized, and maybe part of it is because I'm biracial, but really thinking about how my role in the social change ecosystem is to be a bridge builder. And maybe it's that biracial aspect of my identity, or maybe because I'm a recovering people pleaser, but just this idea that I really want to bring people together. I really think that our community needs one another to move this work forward. And so as I started to do this work and dig in, I really realized that it's actually not about equality and equity. It's actually about justice and liberation. And so what does it look like to really remove the barriers as we provide those opportunities for young people, as we provide opportunities for our new teachers, as we support shifting really the conditions or the system of education in the state. And so I really have learned that relationships are the foundation. So much of how I have learned and where I've got to where I am today is because of people that have poured into me, because of people who, even when I didn't think I could do it, they said, yes, you can. People like Erin, people like Eileen, people like my pastor, people like just all sorts of people throughout my whole educational journey, that even when I couldn't see what was possible, they continued to push me and they pulled the greatness out of me. And so really thinking about what can we do to support other folks to do the same work? How can we help them to realize the greatness that lies inside of them? Because we all have unique gifts and talents. And so how can we really utilize those for the uplift of one another? Just like Alex said earlier today, right? Like we're not in competition with one another. If we all win, when I see someone doing a great job or winning an award, I'm like, yes, I'm so excited because it's a win for the community. And so how can we continue to show up and support one another? And it's really all about love. And so in my classroom, really understanding that we have to develop that critical self-love. And part of that is that connection to our past. part of that is a connection to who we are and what makes us unique, and really understanding all the pieces of our identity. And so as we cultivate that love for ourselves, then we're able to give it to other people. We can never give out anything that we don't already possess. And really understanding that community is a verb. It's something built intentionally over time, and it's something that we have to continuously work to shape. So how do we start building these muscles in our students? So one way we talk about difficult things, and I would say really building these muscles to talk about difficult topics with anyone, is starting with topics that are not really like they're controversial, but in a safe way. So let's start in the chat. I'd love to hear, how many of you believe that pineapple belongs on pizza? Can you drop in the chat yes or no? Okay, so you can see in the chat, there's like yes, or I see a hard no. Okay, so I find my people. So I'm absolutely a believer that pineapple belongs on pizza. But we can have a really serious debate about the merits of pineapple on pizza and start to build those muscles in our students and in one another to really disagree with respect and really think about what does that mean to really connect with one another, to dig into critical topics, but also to be respectful. All right, another one real quick in the chat, your favorite way to eat potatoes. Okay, and if you put fries, can you, like what kind of fries? Are you like a crinkle cut? Are you like a crisscross? Are you like a straight like McDonald's fry? Like, what are you thinking? Steak fry, okay, I love it. I love it. So this, I was in an equity training not too long ago, and someone used this, and I love this because it's like, we all have different ways that we like potatoes, but they're all necessary and needed. And I'm a hard like I can't really decide between crinkle cut fries and sweet potato pie. Like those two things are probably my thing. And then we start to have a discussion about mac and cheese, right? So I use this example of the first time I made a dinner for my husband. We were in college, and I made him some macaroni and cheese, and I cut up some hot dogs and peas, right? Because that's how I grew up. And like, if you were hungry and like you needed something quick, it has protein, veggies. And I remember he was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "It's dinner." And he was like, "What? What? This is not dinner. Macaroni and cheese is a side dish at our house, and it comes out of the oven. It's not made on the top of the stove." And so that's a great way to think about like, what is your connection to macaroni and cheese? And guess what's the right way to do it? The way your family makes it. And so really understanding that there's beauty in how your family does it and how you do it. And there's no right or wrong way. All right. So we start using things like the Racial Healing Handbook, using compassionate listening share outs to really build those muscles. Other ways we do it is through critical mindfulness. So I use mindfulness in my class not as a way to get students to obey, like to promote obedience, not as a way for myself to become less stressed to then become more productive, but to really become more present, to really help my students learn how to bear witness to their feelings and situations that come up in their body, and then how to process them and move through them. How do we use emotions as sort of indicator lights, like on our car, right? It indicates that there's something amiss that might need to be seen by a mechanic. It involves attention. So how do we then utilize mindfulness as a way to see where our bodies need attention, not as a way to promote behavior management or to become more productive. And so I love this quote, "It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." So really, how are we teaching mindfulness to our students as resistance, as a way to push back against sort of the status quo? We always recite in Lakesh every day as this reminder of we are intricately connected in our communities. And so my focus in my classroom, and I would say the focus that can really support educators, is how are we being culturally responsive? How are we putting students' lives, culture, and funds of knowledge at the center of our curriculum and everything that we do? How are we being culturally sustaining? How are we making sure that when young people walk into our classrooms, into our spaces, that we are working to validate their culture and their funds of knowledge, not erase it? How are we making sure that they are seen as whole and loved, and everything we do sustains that wholeness and helps them grow into who they want to become, not who we think they should be? How are we being community responsive? Jeff Duncan Andrade talks a lot about this, and really recognizing the importance of building relationships with families and communities. And these relationships drive how we prepare our young people to analyze and act on community needs. How is all of our curriculum humanizing, centering humanity? How is it anti-racist, encouraging a critique of racial oppression at the institutional, interpersonal, and internalized levels? It's not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it. So my classroom, I use mirrors to really, again, center their connections to themselves, developing that critical self-love, connection to their place in space, windows to see one another. And Sonia Renee Taylor talks about the ladder. How are we making sure to teach students about power, about the system, about the way things are set up in this racialized society? So much of what I believed when I was a young person that was wrong with me, or that I had done something wrong, was connected to my identity as being biracial. And so once I started to learn about the system, I started to understand that there wasn't something wrong with me, but there was a system that needed to be changed, that was conditioning folks to believe certain things about certain groups of people. And ideas, like Dr. Kendi says, can be changed because ideas become the policies. So what are some focuses that we utilize in class? Learning communities. I am not the person with all the knowledge. Even though I'm teacher of the year, I don't have all the answers. And that's so beautiful because number one, takes so much pressure off. I don't have to have all the answers. But it also makes sure that what my students bring into the classroom is important, and their experience and their knowledge is welcomed, valued, and validated. And it also means that I have to continue learning, that I have to always, I'm never going to arrive. So I have to always be a student. I always have to be a learner, not just of content, but of my students. My students are the curriculum. Really thinking about power. How are we interrogating power in the classroom? And not just to identify it, but how are we centering healing? How are we centering joy and futurity? How are we talking about counter narratives for students to understand different perspectives? Not to say all viewpoints are valid, but to look at looking at history to really understand what perspectives are missing, and allowing students to really delve into project and place-based learning to really research things that are interesting to them and then teach one another. How are we using a critical pedagogy? Really thinking about Freire and thinking about how are we challenging our learners to examine power structures and patterns of inequality, and how are we using praxis to do this? So really thinking about social emotional learning has been a big push this year. And I think it's really important to think about our students' mental health, but just like mindfulness, it's something that can actually cause harm if it's not done correctly. So really understanding that we need to look at ACEs. We need to be looking at students' adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments. We need to be trauma informed, and we need to be anti-racist. And so really thinking about how can we center students in what they need. 2020 has been a year full of grief, but also has allowed us to feel gratitude. And so really thinking about what does it mean to center joy as resistance, and really thinking about how can we prioritize looking for joy in our everyday life, and helping to really help our students. Joy is so much deeper than happiness. It is enduring through a crisis, and it's really thinking about how can I pursue it? It's not something that's going to pursue us, and it's a discipline. Miriam Kaba talks about how hope is a discipline, and really thinking about how can we be disciplined to look for joy even through difficult circumstances. So the first box that I want to talk about is thinking about impact versus intent. So thinking about how can we make sure to do this work that we are attending to our impact, that we are, even if we have great intent, which I am sure everyone in this room has, because you're here on a Friday morning and you're here connected to the work, but how can we make sure that we're attending to the impact, even when our intent is good? How are we leaning into the uncomfortable? How are we really ensuring that when things are difficult, that we lean into that is where we grow? Thinking about how we need to really attend to the process and not the product. That if we focus on the way that we're doing things, then we divest from the outcome, then the right things will happen. Thinking about humanity and humility, both are needed. And I love that it's just two different letters, and really thinking about how can we maintain our humility as we center one another's humanity. Alice Walker talks about the most common way people give up their powers by thinking they don't have any. So how are we centering other folks? How are we centering other people's humanity? Not just saying, I have privilege, so I'm going to give some away so you can have privilege, but how are we saying, I'm going to connect my humanity to yours as we move forward? And the box on the bottom that you can't see is solidarity. So how are we linking arms to really work together? And so this box is an article, it's The Anatomy of an Apology, that has been, I've been thinking about this a while, is really thinking about with accountability. Sometimes it hurts to have folks when they're sort of calling you into your impact and saying, this is difficult or this is hard. How do we really attend to that? And how do we really support one another to really, to bear witness, to create space, to center the hurt, to take ownership, and really invest in the labor of reconciliation? Alex, are we getting close to the end? We're good. Okay. I didn't know if that was like time. Okay. I just have a few more slides.
No, you're great.
Okay.
Take your time.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. All right. So, so much. Okay. Perfect. Just making sure. All right. So much of the work right now, of the work that I'm doing with OSPI is looking at what is community-centered wellness. So really thinking about what does wellness look like and what does it feel like in our communities? So Jessica Andrade talks about how wellness is the harmonizing of mind, body, emotion, and spirit. It's cultivated through healthy relationships that are responsive to the lived experiences and historical and material conditions that shape them. But community wellness is the next step, and that's community responsive wellness strengthens the sacred link between self-actualization and community actualization. And it's done in 3 different ways. So the first way is cultivating our inner self. So we have to do work, just like I was talking about earlier, on ourselves. How are we understanding ourselves and creating that strong sense of culture, identity, and agency? That's the inside work. That's the independent internal work that we have to do first. Then we have the interpersonal work. This is the work between us. And this is a rootedness and commitment to showing empathy toward family, community, and peers. And I would say it's really compassion as well, because empathy is a feeling and compassion is an action. So my goal is not for students to tap into other students' oppression, to feel how they feel. My goal is to help students understand and listen, but then show up and take action to support. And so really thinking about what does it mean to develop compassion in one another? What does it mean to help us show up for things that don't directly impact us? That's the goal, I believe, of community wellness, is to say, I'm willing to show up even when something doesn't directly impact me, because I see how it's impacting someone else's humanity. And then interconnectedness. How do we have a positive interrelatedness to our ancestors, to our place, to our land, and to the natural world? And really thinking about how all of those things have to be cultivated together. Those levers of change are necessary to really be developed. So I have to work on myself, I have to work on my community relationships, and then I have to work on my connection to the place and space that I occupy. So thinking about what does that mean for my past? What does that mean for the land that I'm on? What does that mean for being a good steward of the land and the environment that is currently sustaining my well-being? And this is how we grow ecosystems where people and communities experience place, power, purpose, awareness, resilience, empathy, hope, love, and joy. I'm like, yes, that is my goal for everyone, right? Is that we can have communities where folks experience place, where everyone experiences power, where everyone experiences purpose, like all of those things. There is such a sort of myth of scarcity and this idea that there's not enough for everyone, but there is. And what that means is we all have to be willing to engage in creating the solution. I tell my students all the time, we look around the room, it's no one's fault for where we are today, for how we got to today. But collectively, we have to understand how we got to today. We have to tell the truth about where we've been. And then we have a collective responsibility to reimagine that more just and joyful future. How are we working together every day to build that? And really thinking about stitching that new garment that fits all of humanity and nature, not one group, not just people, but all of humanity and nature. And we all have such an important integral role to play in that. And I love this because Malcolm X says, when I is replaced by we, even illness becomes wellness. And so really thinking the power that we have when we work together. All right. So Gholdy Muhammad, Cultivating Genius, again, another book, absolute queen. I absolutely adore Gholdy Muhammad, but she talks about, there's been a lot of discussion lately about learning loss. And so she talks about the issue with the rhetoric of learning loss presumes that students were only at a loss during a pandemic. Yet children, and uniquely Black children, have been at an educational loss, including loss of identity and joy, since the inception of this country being colonized. Can you lose something that systemically schools never gave you? And so this has been something that's really resonated with me and something that I've been thinking about as we're thinking, we're wrapping up this school year and really thinking about that stitching that new garment for the fall. And so I really want us to think about, how do we return to school in the fall differently? How can we really utilize this terrible, terrible circumstance that the pandemic has been to reimagine that more just and joyful educational experience for all of our students, one that fits all of humanity and nature? What would we need to prioritize? What would really need to shift in our communities? And so I want to go through a few questions, and I just want you to sort of think about what this looks like in your sphere of influence. There's so many different folks on this call with so many different roles and so many different levers that you can really engage to create that change, to shift those systems for that more just and joyful future. So if you have a pen and paper and you want to jot down some notes, or you just want to think about it, I just invite you to engage with these questions as we sort of think about what it looks like in your sphere of influence. Because remember, we all have a role in the social change ecosystem. Sometimes part of that first step is identifying what role we can have. So I really want to focus on community and thinking about what it really means to build authentic community. And so one of the ways that I think about when we build community, and you could think about community in a lot of different ways. I think about it in my school about sort of the larger community that includes parents, that includes my students, but it also includes the folks that live in the community. Maybe you think about community as your colleagues in the place that you live. There's your neighborhood. There's lots of ways that we can sort of define community. But sort of what I've learned is, if you really want to get to know your community, you really want to build some authentic partnership with your community, one of the first things you need to understand is, what is the harm in your community? Who's doing the harm in your community? How is your community being impacted? Another thing I want us to think about is, what is the hope? What does your community hope for? What does success look like in your community? It's not about what we believe is best, but it's about centering the needs and the desires of the folks that live inside of your community. So how do we know what the hope is? And the last thing is how do we know what the heart is? Who's already doing the work? How do you partner with folks that are already engaged in the work to build their work up? Because true community, just like Alex said so poignantly at the beginning, is not a competition. It's not about who gets the recognition. It's about the legacies that are impacted by the work that we collectively do. And so really thinking about when I teach in my classroom and I see a group of students, I don't see 28 faces of young people. I see their grandkids. I see the young people that they're going to impact because they finished the diploma. But it's not about the diploma. It's about the skills. It's about the cultivation of their gifts. It's about them reaching what they want to become, not what I think is best for them. I'm just there to chaperone them. I heard this quote not too long ago. I was like, as a parent, our job is to chaperone our kids through life. And I think about that for my students too. I'm just there to chaperone them. I'm not there to tell them what's right, what's the best thing for them. I'm not there to define success. I'm just there to help them reach their goals. I heard a young person a couple of weeks ago share some words that I think I will take with me for the rest of my life. When he said a powerful educator, and I would just say a powerful adult, is someone who has taken the time to understand themselves, has taken the time to understand us young people, who has taken the time to overstand the curriculum, their content, what they're teaching. I was like, overstand, who is this kid? He's amazing. And then super powerful, he said, we need teachers, educators that understand their gift so they can help us find ours. And I was just like, yes, teaching is so much more than content. Building community is so much more than checking a box or holding a meeting or giving a survey. It's about authentically, intentionally getting to know one another. And so really thinking about what does that mean in the space that you occupy to build that authentic, intentional community. So some questions for thought is, what is your positionality in your community? Are you an outsider that drives into the community? Do you live within your community? And how does that impact your work? You can still be very effective even if you don't live inside of your community, but you have to make sure that you're attending to that as you do your work. We don't know better than our community does for what they need. So how do we partner with them to really understand what they need and what that looks like? How do we include families in the process of building partnerships, not just as targets for intervention? How do we ensure that we are listening to our families? How do we ensure that we are allowing their voices and their needs to be heard, and we are centering what they need? If we're hosting events, if we're hosting get-togethers or activities, have we asked if that's really what our families need or want? And if not, how can we start to do that? How can we build that trust? How can we go to them instead of asking them to come to us? What power are you willing to relinquish? What ownership are you willing to give up to allow families and community members to take leadership roles? How are you committed to the process and not just simply the product? So some of the one of the resources that I've been using quite a bit, it's the Spectrum of Family and Community Engagement for Educational Equity, and really thinking about how can we support to move from this your voice, needs, and interests don't matter, this marginalization, over to community ownership. Really thinking about how do we do that? And how do we partner with the folks that we work with to move across the continuum to really build those authentic relationships? How do we use the outside and inside organizing to really, again, connect with parents and youth, to build the leadership and power of students and parents and community members to define priorities for educational equity and put pressure on systems to make that change? And then building accountable relationships with people who work within the system to facilitate those necessary changes. So again, utilizing those levers with inside the system and outside the system to make those changes happen. And I saw this quote and I just think it's so beautiful. It says, kindness matters, but kindness does not equal justice. Civility counts, but civility is not the humane response to injustice. Justice is. Love is essential, but love is not a passive weeping bystander. Love puts in work. Dr. Bernice King. And so this is the last quote I have, and that's, too often we think the work of fighting oppression is just intellectual. The real work is personal, emotional, spiritual, and communal. It is explicit with a deep and intense understanding that loving Blackness is an act of political resistance. That's Dr. Bettina Love. So these are just some more resources if you'd like to learn more about some of the work. WAFN is a great place to learn more about Acosta Educational Partnership. Shito, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown is one of the best books I've read. And just really thinking about how can we continue to learn to be able to shift those levers of change. And so if you would like to connect, you can find me on the Twitter. I'm new to the Twitter, so feel free to follow me. And my email is there if you have any questions.
There are. Thank you, Brooke, so much. If you have a question, if you put it in the chat, we will try to relay those. We hope we can answer as many questions as there are, but we will go to as many questions as there are time for. And just want to thank you, Brooke, for your just vibrance and your leadership and passion around this, and give folks an opportunity to put any questions that they have in the chat. You're getting lots of appreciations, and I don't see any questions yet, but I know that we've got lots of folks that that may have a question. So we'll give everyone a moment to just kind of think about what's one wondering or question that you might have for Brooke. So I see one question or question from Janet. Can you tell us a success story? What does a success story look like?
Yeah, I can just think of one that happened pretty recently. And so I started incorporating mindfulness into my class this year, and really thinking about how I can help students just really take the time to really center. I have this joke that when we're in the building, that when they walk into my classroom, I'm always like, "You're entering the learning zone." I'm super corny, and they're always like, "Oh, Ms. Brown." But I talk about how, when we are doing educational endeavors, that it's sort of like going to the gym, right? When we take we imagine taking our brains and like putting them on the treadmill. It's not always fun, but it's healthy. It's good for us. And so I had so we do these specific activities every day in class to sort of get us ready, even virtually, for the learning zone. And so we were doing mindfulness, and we're doing some deep breathing. And so I had a student that stayed after class one day, and she said, "Hey, Ms. Brown, I just want you to know how you impact me even when you're not with me." And I was like, "Okay, tell me a little bit more." And she said, "I had a panic attack this weekend. It was the first time I've ever had one." And she said, "But because of our mindfulness breathing," she said, "I was able to get through it, and I knew I would be okay." And so because of those practices that we had been building in, I have been trying to help my students develop just these, learning how to bear witness to their emotions and learning how to move through them. And so it wasn't something that she got stuck in. It wasn't something that she was afraid of. It was something that she understood her body was going through, and she was able to bear witness to it and to move through it. And so to me, that is a really powerful success story, because my students are learning how to move through life in a healthy way. And again, not to become more productive, not to manage their behavior, but to be fully present and to be, you know, just thriving. And so to me, that was a really big success story, to hear her share that.
Thank you, Brooke. Another question in the chat was, what components that you discussed today do you think should be part of every teacher education program? From Jenny.
Oh, that's a good question. I think all of them. I think when we think about ethnic studies, I think when we think about sort of the components that I talked about, the focus of education really on, okay, let me take a step back real quick. I think we're sort of at a crossroads in our educational system where we're trying to figure out sort of who we are and what we're doing. And I think we have an opportunity to really define what that looks like, to stitch that new garment. And so I think when we think about being culturally responsive, really centering our students' experience in funds of knowledge, when we think about being culturally sustaining and community relevant and anti-racist, when we're talking about really thinking about sort of all of those things, really utilizing praxis, making sure that you know, we're developing learning communities. I just think it's so much more about the how we're teaching than the what. I think for so long we focused on content, we focused on the what we're teaching, but I think we're really recognizing that we have to focus on the how. And so I think when we think about teacher preparation programs, I really think just really time to learn and to develop and to engage with folks' own identity development and really thinking about what does it mean to show up in my classroom as me? Like, what does that mean to bring my whole self so that I can create a space where my students can bring their whole self? And if we haven't done that self-work, then how can we ask our students to do that same self-work? And I also think that, yes, content is important. And yes, we need to have standards. But I just think having whole students that can move through life and have that connection to their self, have that connection to the ancestors, have that connection to our place where they live, whose land they occupy, have a connection to nature and to understanding their role in climate change and that they can take action, like all of those things, the agency that they possess, critical thinking skills. I just think all of it is so necessary and important. And yes, content is important, but I think it's not the most important.
Great, thank you. I see another question in the chat, and that is, let's say we get a great start on all of these things. How do we deal with change and the fact that districts are still segregated by specific actions of people, white families only moving to certain districts, inequities of funding, how do we, as individuals, as educators, help change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that sort of speaks to sort of the scarcity idea as well. I just finished reading, again, another book recommendation, sorry, The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. And I think it's so powerful when we think about, you know, there's been in Washington State, folks were more willing to drain the community pool than allow Black folks to swim in it. And so really thinking about that as a really deep understanding of the historical ramifications of how we got to today. And that's what I think you're speaking to, John, is really thinking about, you know, there's so many different things at play. And so I think this, the title of this conference is so fitting for this, and that levers of change. You know, we are not going to be able to change the whole system overnight. We are not going to be able to change it for everyone. But I'm thinking back to I on the last day of school in spring quarter, I read, or spring semester, I read the afterword. It was like the acknowledgments of Stamped. It was by Jason Reynolds' Words to Young People, and it was really talking about how we cannot be. I'm going to read it to you real fast because I think it answers the question. Is that okay? Okay. Because I think this totally gets to what we have to be willing to do. Sorry, I know this is like totally off script, but I think this is really fitting. It's going to start with our young people. Our young people, I think, are the ones that are going to be able to do this. But he says, scrolling will never be enough. Reposting will never be enough. Hashtagging will never be enough. Because hatred has a way of convincing us that half love is whole. What I mean by that is we, all of us, have to fight against performance and lean into participation. We have to be participants, active. We have to be more than audience members shouting comfortably in the stands of morality, shouting, wrong. That's too easy. Instead, we must be players on the field, on the court, in our classrooms and communities trying to do right. Because it takes a whole hand, both hands, to grab hold of hatred. Not just a texting thumb and a scrolling index finger. But I have to warn you again, we can't attack a thing we don't know. That's dangerous and foolish. It would be like trying to chop down a tree from the top of it. If we understand how the tree works, how the trunks and roots are where the power lies, and how gravity is on our side, we can attack it, each of us with small axes, and change the face of the forest. So let's learn all there is to know about the tree of racism. The root, the fruit, the sap in the trunk, the nests built over time, the changing leaves. That way, your generation can finally actively chop it down. And so I think Jason Reynolds is a genius. I can never say anything as poignant as him, but just really thinking that's what it is it's all of us utilizing our levers of change where we can with what we have, arming ourselves with the knowledge, with the history, and being willing to actively engage in shifting the narrative, shifting the material conditions for our young people and for one another.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I think there are a lot of additional questions. I feel like it would be great to hear from you all day long because you just are so wise and are just have so much insight. But just want to appreciate you and thank you for being a great educator, but a real educator, and for bringing the many communities that you're part of and sharing your story and giving us an inside view into what effective equity centered teaching looks like. Let's give Brooke one last show of appreciation. Yay! Thank you. It's not quite the same, but we are just so appreciative, and we have a virtual bouquet for you.